Trystie's Quest, or Kit, King of the Pigwidgeons. By Greville MacDonald. Chapter 21. Crickety is no sportsman and Kit knocks him down. Kit is too trustful and pays the penalty. Trystie's heroism and great danger. Arrival of the leprechaun, the duel. It was a comparatively small number of the Pigwidgeons after all that went after Davy on his squirrel's back. Thousands remained in the hole. Nor were many of them killed in the battle in the treetop. They were hardly the sort to take heavy risks, even with the hope of squirrel pie and peppermints to give them courage. Some were blinded by the finches, others were killed by Major Blackbird's rapier, 2 at least by Sir Squirrel and 3 by Davy, now a captain, with the right to wear the fairy cross, and to write FC after his name. The blinded creatures fell with the dead ones to the ground, and those that were not killed by the fall were drowned by the rain. In the morning the only signs of the terrible execution done in the night were the sodden and broken roots of all kinds that littered the woodland carpet. Passers-by would have been puzzled to know how bits of turnips, potatoes, swedes, parsnips, horseradish, salsify, and so on, had come there. I found them myself some days later, and so, of course, can vouch for the accuracy of Davy's report of the battle. But many of the defeated Pigwidgeons found their way back to their hole, bedraggled, soaking wet, and with all the fight washed out of them. Not only had the river come into their country, but now the rain had got into themselves. When they reached home they would not join with the others, but sat or walked apart, conscious of disgrace. Curiously, they now always fed 2 together and often pressed their titbits upon each other. The others looked upon them as lunatics, hated and maltreated them more than was customary, and hoped the creaky cart would soon fetch them away. But during Davy's flight and the subsequent battle in the treetop, things were going badly with his sister and brothers. It is impossible to account for Cricketus acquiring the ability to rule his people and direct proceedings. But these he did certainly with some skill, just as he had succeeded in robbing Kit of his recorder. In the darkness that followed the theft, the usurper got together an army of which Kit had known nothing. It was composed of the pigmonker-like people, but rooty, and they were well drilled into a sort of regimental submission. These came marching up in companies and formed a wide crescent, bounded by the river. King Crickety strutted in the center, and was armed with a straight sword and buckler. The soldiers continued to arrive, until the crescent contained 1,000 men armed to the teeth and mostly with teeth, long, sharp, and bitter. For a wide space the soldiers kept free of the riverbank, as if afraid of it. The river itself, since the fairy ships had foundered, had grown much wider. When Trystie looked for a moment across it, she saw through a faint haze a lovely country looking very like downland, and not very far away she was quite sure she saw her godmother's castle. She longed to go back into the river again, but this she knew she must not do, because Kit could not yet come with her, because Davy was she knew not where, and because she could not leave Miss Duckling till she also was safe. Kit boldly stepped forwards to the king. "Look here, old Crickety," he said, not boastfully, though a little contemptuously, and rightly so. "Look here, you're welcome to the throne, and be hanged to the lot of you. The throne for one, a long rope for all, but that recorder is mine. Jonas gave it to me for my own. If you don't give it back, I do believe the creaky cart will make you." "It's rummy funny, Kit," replied the king, speaking more familiarly than ever before, "that I don't have you strung up like a lantern, you young ape. But since you made Lord Curdie give me back the piece he bit out, and since that shocking river came, I want to be kind. All the same, I shan't give you back the recorder, because you'll blow it, and then the creaky cart will come. Besides, it's put where it ought to be, in the Museum of Woes. We needed it to make our collection of superstitions quite the finest in the world." Then Kit, Trystie tells us, spoke up like a man and without any boastfulness. "Crickety," he said, "I shall kill you." He jeered the ungainly little monster, striking a theatrical attitude with his sword and shield. "The deader a Pigwidgeon gets, the harder it is to kill him. So kill away, my buck." Kit rushed at Crickety and with one blow at his head knocked him over. Kit could then have seized his sword and killed him, had he been so minded, but he would not strike even a Pigwidgeon that was down. The king lay still, shamming dead. His bodyguard seized Kit. Then they picked Crickety up, ran the skewer up through the seat of the throne and jammed him upon it to keep him in his place. Then they gave him his sword and shield. "Fetch Lord Curdie to pull it out," yelled Crickety, And you shall have the recorder, I swear, Master Kit. Kit, though his arms were by this time tightly bound to his sides and his legs together, thought Crickety was easier to deal with than the soldiers, and might possibly keep his word. So he called Curdie, who had been flying at and biting the bodyguard for all he was worth, and bade him pull the skewer out. The dog obeyed, and Crickety stepped down from the throne. "There's no room for fools in Gallybird's hole," said the king with a loud sneer. "Take him to the spiders to hang." The guard marched Kit away. Then Trystie unfortunately forgot her godmother's warning and left the magic yaw on the river bank. With Robin in her arms, she hurriedly pushed through the crowd and stood before Crickety. She was too proud a girl to show fear or tears to such a creature. She just quietly asked if there was nothing she could do to save Kit. Crickety took no notice, but bade the soldiers bind her and Robin also. The king climbed onto his throne again and ordered the guard to bring Trystie to him. This done, he bade the men retire. Then, hissing between his loose teeth, he told Trystie that he had them all safely bound, that Davy was devoured by wild birds, and that he would have Kit's and Robin's eyes out. He stopped to take breath and a turn with his bull's eye, which had got jammed. He put his long finger into his mouth to unfix it, and then pointed at Trystie. "And what are you doing here, minx?" he asked. "I came to rescue Kit and find the iron chest where the choose keys are kept." "You'll never do neither," said Crickety. He was seldom grammatical. "There's no such thing as choose keys. Perhaps you've got one of your own?" "Of course I have, or I should be a Pigwidgeon by this time," replied Trystie, who at that moment felt quite certain the children who had had their keys stolen must have grown into these Pigwidgeons. "Then give it to me," exclaimed Crickety in such sudden and terrible excitement that the bull's eye fell out. He picked it up, wiped it on the gold fringe of the cushion he sat upon, and put it in his mouth again. "Give it me, you little she-liar, give it me, and I swear you shall all go free. I'll set you free first, if you promise. Give it me." Choose keys can never be taken away by force when once their possessors know about them. They can only be given. So Crickety had to beg for Trystie's. What he wanted it for will never be known. But Trystie remembered how her godmother had warned her when, 3 years before, she recovered her own key in Goblin Town, never to part with it, not even to save her own or any other body's life. "I mustn't do that," she answered firmly, but turning very pale, "because the choose keys all belong to my godmother, the Queen. Besides, it is in my heart now." "That's a lie, you she-girl," interrupted the king. "You haven't got a heart, nor a godmother. There ain't no queen. They're all superstitions and don't count." "I don't know whether you are very stupid or very ignorant," said Trystie severely, and now trembling all over, "and it does not much matter, because I won't give you my key even to save my brothers. I would not if I could. But you may have my eyes, if that will save theirs." The moment she said this, Crickety leaped upon her and seized her face in his hands with such force and quickness that she fell under him. Robin then began to cry despairingly, but the bodyguard closed in upon them, and Trystie could hardly speak one word to comfort him. Curdie was nowhere to be seen. Meantime very important events were taking place of which neither Crickety nor his bodyguard could know. Trystie too did not know, because her whole attention was taken up with Robin and the king and her determination to give her own eyes if they would save the boys. To explain what followed, we must go back a little bit. Because an army is well drilled, it does not follow that even its officers are clever people. The Pigwidgeon guards who marched Kit away were but a pack of stupids. They had some idea, however, that Kit and his friends were different from themselves. As they marched the boy along, they came to the conclusion that, as he was not quite ordinary, he must be a specimen and, after he was googled, must be stuffed. "In that case," said the corporal, "we'd better take him to the museum and put him into the torture dungeon, where they do the skinning and stuffing. He'll be a lovely woe with nice glass eyes and a bushy tail. None of them ever escapes with his life and very few without it. He'll be quite safe there." So, as good fortune had it, or, I wonder, was it some secret emissary from the Queen that suggested it to the corporal, Kit was thrust and locked into the Museum of Woes. Though it was almost pitch dark, there of course he found lying on the floor, its black shiny surface reflecting a little light from somewhere or other, his cherished recorder. The stupid corporal had either forgotten all about it, or was ignorant of its magic when played upon by its master. Kit picked it up and began to play. The most wonderful music then poured out of its happy throat, music like a band of Christian birds marching, or rather winging, to a glorious fight, glorious, because they knew they would win the day for their queen and their nests and their chicks and their summer days of blue skies and quiet rains, glorious, because they also knew that these could be saved only by giving their own lives. Kit will remember it all his life long, I think. He calls it the March of the Birds. The words of it shall be put at the end of this chapter so as not to delay telling how things went. But the words are little without the music. It was as martial as bagpipes on the hills, as thrilling as blackbirds' carols to the sun. The music sped away directly, out from the dungeon into the hole, out from the hole and away into the wide world. It filled all the country around as well as the children's hearts. It reached Cricketis' ears at the very moment when he seized Trystie's face in his rooty hands, and he pulled them away as if something invisible had struck him in the face. Trystie says that, as soon as she heard it, something seemed to shine so brightly everywhere that all the ugliness got transparent and weak. It made her feel, although painfully bound, no longer afraid. Robin stopped crying and watched his airball rise and pull upon its string. The guards fell back and left them space to breathe. Crickety got upon his feet, set his right foot upon Trystie's chest and his fingers in his ears. He stopped chewing, he shivered, his red buttons turned pale, his teeth chattered and many fell out. But he put all his weight upon his right foot, so that Trystie could hardly breathe and found it impossible to move, beyond turning her head a little. Somehow the music was so entrancingly full of courage and love and faith that nothing else now seemed to be of much importance. She could gladly part with her eyes for Kit's sake, gladly indeed, though she would never more see him nor mother, father, Davy, Robin, Honeypot, and the darling twins, never more behold the birds and the downs and Curdie, nor the Thistledown fairy fleet, nor her godmother, nor her dearest Captain Leprechaun. Kit piped away merrily in the dungeon of woes. Trystie turned her head to the river. She could see it for a mile or more, now that the guard had left a little space about her. She could see the waves dancing upon it, and on its banks the yellow flags waving in the breeze that was blowing up its course. The haze beyond was clearing. The Queen's castle shone radiantly in the sun, and its flags never ceased streaming, though all the time changing into birds that sped away with orders from the Queen. Slowly up, surely nearer and nearer, sailed the fairy fleet, and the river was wide enough for all. Leading them was the noblest full-rigged ship Trystie had seen. When close to where she lay with that villain foot upon her chest, the wind dropped. With magic speed the sails were furled, and the captain's gig launched. Fairy sailors leaped into it and rowed to the river's bank. Then there sprang ashore Captain Leprechaun. Trystie knew she was saved. Still Kit piped away in the dungeon. "Trystie, princess," cried the leprechaun, "it's myself, the little cobbler, at your service with me rapier." He stood there looking, for all his small stature, so loving and fierce, so gaily dressed in his shining green and his red hood, his rapier hanging at his side with glittering silver hilt and white shagreen scabbard, and his sword belt shining like running water, that Trystie's heart got very full of happiness. Crickety took his foot off Trystie and stepped back. Somehow his cowardice had all left him, whether because of the intensity of his greed, or because the influence of river and music was actually awakening some good quality in him, even if only that of brute fight, it is impossible to say. But he drew and flourished his short sword, prepared to contest to the death his rights in Trystie's eyes. Now you might think that the fight would soon be over and that Crickety, with his heavy hacking sword and round little buckler, would be no match for the captain's long cut-and-thrust rapier. For this was a magic blade from Toledo itself. Some say that it used to hang up alongside of Kit's recorder in Shakespeare's parlor. More likely it is that Vincenzio Saviolo, who taught Shakespeare all he knew about fencing, taught the noble leprechaun also, and made of him a match for any man or blade of like metal. But his enemy now was a handful, as all swashbucklers are, not because of his sword or his weight, not even because of his lucky peppermint, but solely because of his crass ignorance and unblemished stupidity. These are summed up by one word in fairy language and are called selfishness. It is the most terrible enemy of the Queen's. It takes all her ingenuity, patience, strength, yes, and suffering to overcome. Little wonder, then, that Trystie's captain had his work cut out for him, before he could cut it up. He roared Crickety, banging together his sword and buckler and dancing like a play actor. Ha! Ha! Sang out the captain, as he drew his rapier, stamped his foot and lunged within an ace of the heart his enemy had not got. At this moment Trystie came running back quite breathless. He had, they supposed, gone after Kit and had been trying to get into the dungeon. Now there was other work for him. He saw in a moment what was doing, and knew he must keep the king's bodyguard at bay while the duel proceeded. Trystie was every inch a sportsman and meant to see fair play. Kit's music still filled the air with thrilling strains. Trystie parried the thrust just as the blade was withdrawn, a maneuver puzzling enough to any but an Irishman. Trystie fiercely slashed to right and left, mixing up sword and buckler in the most absurd way. The leprechaun, thanks to his matchless dexterity, escaped damage by use of the incortata or vault aside, by the passe-deux and other accredited feats. He was full of secret foins, as he would have termed his tricks of hand and wrist, all justifiable and necessary to disarm a solid fool. How supple and quick that hard little hand must be, thought Trystie, amidst hope, fear, and excitement, in spite of the cobbler's wax. At last, by a rinverso tondo, a twist of the rapier's point, the brave captain whipped out one of Trystie's eyes, and, while the creature dealt a slashing blow that would have felled a lion, the captain dodged, lunged, and recovered, only to deliver a downward cut from the right with the point of his weapon, a stromazone in rapier language, which laid open Trystie's cheek and allowed the lucky bull's-eye to drop upon the ground. Then Trystie, forgetting his danger, tried, before any of his bodyguard could grab it, to catch in his buckler the sticky sweet as it rolled away, but he lost his footing and fell. The bodyguard then fled. Trystie, now less sportsmanlike, I fear, came and stood with his forepaws on Trystie's breastplate, showing his teeth and growling fearfully. The Pigwidgeon king again shammed dead. The victorious captain cut the bonds that tied Trystie and Robin. Still Kit piped away in the dungeon of woes, and this was the song sung by the recorder. Now in the dawn is the pibroch heard with yawler and warblers and trill, black is the wing of the piper bird, his melody martial and shrill. March and rise on chivalrous wing, birds will all muster today to clear the grim ramparts of cloud from the sky, and make for the rainbow away. March and rise on chivalrous wing, soldiers and fairies are we, wings are our ladders to scale walls on high, hope is the maid we must free. Now in the dawn is the pibroch heard with yawler and warblers and trill, strong in his wind is the piper bird, yellow and sweet is his bill. March and rise on chivalrous wing, keen are our courage and beak, arms win the day when love yields her might, and glory gives strength to the weak. March and rise on chivalrous wing, rushing aloft to obey, with pibroch and song to encourage the right, and die for our queen any day. Now in the dawn is the pibroch heard with yawler and warblers and trill, black is the wing of the piper bird, rosy the morning and still. End of this chapter.